Welcome to the Cyber Insider, Emsisoft's podcast all about cybersecurity. Your hosts today are Brett Callow, threat analyst here at Emsisoft, and I'm Luke Connolly, partner manager. Our guest today is Ryan Chapman. Ryan is the author of SANS Forensics 528, Ransomware and Cyber Extortion, and is a certified instructor for SANS. In his day job, he's a consultant for threat hunting and incident response. Ryan often presents at conferences, including running workshops for the last 4 years running at DefCon. He spends his free time with his daughter watching anime, plays plenty of Street Fighter, and enjoys playing retro video games. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you.
I provided a brief bio. Can you expand on your experience and your area of expertise? And along that line, for people listening who may not have heard of SANS, or maybe they've heard of SANS and aren't familiar with it, can you describe for us what is SANS?
Yes. So I've been working in digital forensics and incident response for a little bit over 12 years now. And I started in a security operations center, moved over to a CERT, and then moved into consulting. So I was doing IR consulting. So, when the hackers come in, one of our teams gets called in, kind of thing. And boy, it was a rush, straight up adrenaline junkie for it, but it got to be a little too much. So work-life balance wise, or lack thereof, I should say. So in the past couple of months, I actually transitioned over to managed threat hunting. So I get to basically hunt for threats within large client environments. And that's also very, very fun. Not so much when you have to inform them of something like, hey, this is really bad. You need to go look at that. But I've been working for SANS now for about 4 years. And so the SANS Institute's been around since, as far as I know, the late 90s at least. And it's primarily focused on security, ongoing training and education. So you take a 4, 5, 6 day course on a particular topic, be it, offensive operations or digital forensics, like what I do. They've got management courses, things of that nature. And so my course is on ransomware, and it's specific to ransomware in terms of prevention, detection, and hunting. And, we see the numbers going up and up and up and up for ransomware, and I don't want that anymore. So, trying to help educate the global community, the royal we, so that we can be better prepared to prevent it and get rid of it.
I think SANS actually, just doing some research before this, I think SANS actually started in the late 80s. So its founding was contemporaneous with the Morris worm, which I'll allow people to look up on their own time on Wikipedia.
Yeah, we can probably date ourselves if we start talking about the initial things we worked on and looked at. Yeah, for sure.
What's the difference between an incident response consultant and an incident responder? Is there one?
So typically we consultants are third parties. So we're brought in via the first party. So usually the victim, right? Or we're brought in via insurance or legal counsel will typically bring us in. And to me, an incident responder is anyone who is going to be dealing with an active incident. And so many times organizations feel we don't have incident responders. I'm like, yeah, but you do, because you have people in IT. And some organizations say, well, you work in IT, so you're our incident responder, without any formal training or whatnot. But incident responders can be someone on a security operations center, computer incident response team, or CIRT, CERT, however it's defined at that given organization. And typically their job is to be the ones to respond to an incident. But in my mind, anyone, including folks who are on, the applications teams, the servers teams, the software patching cycle teams, those folks are all going to be involved in a large scale incident. So I consider them all incident responders. But we third-party consultants live a life where it's day-to-day incidents. And so we see this wide breadth of various types of attacks, going from a simple crypto miner all the way up through a crazy large ransomware case, and then leading up to something like an advanced persistent threat attack, something like that. We have mage cart attacks in the middle of that, financial crimes, stealing and scraping credit cards from websites. Like we see it all. And I think that internally, one of the issues that IR folks have when they say I'm an incident responder, but they don't feel confident about saying that, is because they haven't worked a ton of incidents, which honestly is a good thing for the most part, right? You don't want to have worked tons of incidents for your organization, because that points to a poor security posture. But yeah, I think overall, we're all in IT, we should all have the mindset that we are a responder. And all we have to do is just be confident and capable with our particular realms so that we can, whoever's actually running as like the incident commander, we can help them and provide whatever answers they need whenever they need them.
So you must have been at this for a while, so I'm sure you've seen some really unusual cases. What's your most interesting war story?
My most interesting is going to be my first, and that was back in 2012. And it was the early days of Carbon Black, the endpoint detection and response software, and I had never seen an EDR before. And I found myself in an environment where we had multiple APT groups from a particular country. I won't name the country, but you could probably guess within 2 or 3 guesses. And I was able to actually monitor the commands they were running nearly in real time. It was just seconds away from as they were running them. And while it was my initial foray into incident response, it was also one of the most capable threat actors I've seen to this day. And every little thing that we were doing, we would then see them undo it right away. And like, for example, we would do some registry change, and all of a sudden we would see them do a reg delete or a reg add from the command line. We'd be like, okay, how'd you see that so quickly? Like, what's going on here? And they were so persistent. So, some examples is we identify, okay, they're coming in via RDP. So we drop RDP from whether geolocation or however we were doing it at the time. And then they'd come in via the VPN. And we're like, oh, okay, well, they have access to these accounts. Let's just disable these accounts. And they come in with more. And then they come in with more. And we're like, okay, you know what? We have to just drop VPN except for like just us. And then one of us had their credentials utilized. And it was like, how are they doing this? And they just kept coming back and back and back. And then we eventually dropped all VPN connectivity. The company was affected. And all of a sudden they had these backdoors, and we found them, active on other machines. We're like, stop it. And it was this game of cat and mouse. And while working in IR, especially as a consultant for the past 4.5, almost 5 years, doing, third-party consulting, you work day-to-day incidents. And the only threat actor I've seen who's as persistent has been Scattered Spider, also known as Muddled Libra, and a number of other names that they have assigned to them. But their ability to get back in was on par with this initial group. And it's just, whenever I think about it, it's just crazy watching them literally undo everything that we had just done in order to prevent them. We're doing a deny terminal services connection at registry key, we're turning off terminal services, RDP, and they just enable it right back. And then we remove users from remote desktop users. And then we see them on another machine using a domain admin account, adding them right back. And it's like, stop it. And so I think that's my favorite war story, just because it was literally like a war. It was like an active real-time engagement. And it's not as common these days, especially working a lot of ransomware cases, that we see that level of skill.
You mentioned Scattered Spider, just for the benefit of people who may not be familiar with them.
Oh.
What can you tell us?
Yes. So I have so much to say about them. There's a group that's known as the COM, and there's a very large, let's say very large, subgroup of threat actors who specialize in multi-factor authentication bypass, social engineering of help desk environments, and then SMS phishing. So, smishing, as we call it. So phone-based phishing. And a subgroup of this COM is known as Scattered Spider. That's CrowdStrike's term for them. Palo Alto calls them Muddled Libra. There's a number of other names. Microsoft has their own name for them. But it's primarily this group of, I believe the last estimate was 15 to 25-year-old males for the most part, because they're so juvenile, and they hang out in these groups where there's just constant onslaught of large organizations, including like telecoms are a big one that they're constantly trying to get into. And they're really, really good at getting into very secure environments. They're also good at getting into non-secure environments, because duh. But, we have our MFA set up. Not we, I'm just saying the royal we, the client that I've worked with. may have MFA on even RDP. A lot of people don't have that in remote desktop protocol. And this group will just, they're so good. I mean, they'll go on a video call with the help desk and they'll show their face and everything and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I work with so-and-so. And then they'll have another one come on to the video call and be like, yes, I'm so-and-so's manager. This is me. I'm verifying my identity. And the help desks often, especially those third-party help desks sometimes, will be like, oh, okay. And then they'll reset their passwords. They'll even reset MFA, just take off the phone associated with it or whatnot. That's one of the ways that they get in, just straight social engineering, but of live interactive human social engineering versus like a phishing email, right? And then another thing they're really good at is what's called SIM swapping. So most of our phones have what's known as a SIM, whether it's internal or literally when you pop in and out, and that's where your account is basically stored. And so if you were to change phones with certain providers, like TDMA, non-CDMA, for example, is the most common. You could just swap a phone and take your SIM card out, put it in the new phone. Or if for whatever reason you lose your phone, you might have to purchase a new phone or a new SIM card. And so what these threat actors do, the scattered spider groups, they're really, really good social engineering telecoms. So I should say mobile providers. And they'll call them up, they'll go into the store. They have this wide network where they have like one person holds the phone, one person works the actual social engineering attack. The other person is the one who gains entry. And then once they've gained entry, they hand it off to another group who does their thing. They're really good at bypassing MFA via SIM swapping. And one of the ways they do that is, for example, I was on a call one time with a client, actively on a call with a client mid-engagement, and the call dropped. And I just thought, okay, well, he'll call me back in a couple minutes or whatever. So about 15 minutes later, he calls me back via FaceTime. And he's like, so I just got SIM swapped. And I was like, what? He said, yeah. So what happened is the threat actor, they also have these people on payroll. And so Scattered Spider has this network of people who work at stores where I won't mention names, where they sell cell phones and cellular services. And sometimes they'll actually steal the management pad. There's these little, I don't know if they're iPads or other, but there's these pads that allow for swapping of accounts that typically the manager of a store will hold, have access to. And they'll steal those, like literally just take them out of the store. So they have people on payroll, essentially. They have the ability to steal some of those pads, and then it's social engineering. And if you have your multi-factor set up to use SMS, text messaging, to where when you log in, you get a text message that says, here's your code and whatnot. They love that. So be careful with that for anyone watching. If you're using multi-factor authentication, try to avoid using SMS. Applications that are installed on the phone, especially those that require that you put a number in when the app pops it up, a little notification, are more secure. I was going to say far more secure. I'm going to go with more secure because of this group and groups like them. And they're so good. They're so good once they get into an environment. They can go anywhere.
In terms of trends, what really jumps out at you over the last year?
That's the trend. Those are the trends right there that group is utilizing. And it's SIM swapping and smishing and overall MFA bypass. For years, most organizations didn't have MFA, leading up to, it was only like really 4 or 5 years ago when it started to become like fairly commonplace that, organizations implement MFA in the first place. And now that we have it, we're so, we're like, oh, we're compliant. We have MFA. We're like, we're fine. No, you may not be fine, especially just because of simple social engineering. So I see SMS phishing, smishing as this new trend that's going to get worse and worse and worse. And it's because if you think about it, most organizations still use a BYOD, a bring your own device policy. And few of them are using MDM, mobile device management. I guess I'm going to have acronyms all day long here, but so mobile device management allows the organization to have purview over that mobile device, to be able to implement their firewall rules on the mobile device, to be able to identify malicious numbers or even just malicious providers like anonymous phone numbers, services, VoIP services, things of that nature. But so many users just have a phone, and a lot of folks just pull a phone out of a drawer from years prior and go, oh, I'm going to use this for my work phone. And these phishing messages, there's very little oversight into the phish messages coming in. And when the user clicks on one of those links, I said click, but when they tap on one of those links and they enter their credentials, you're not seeing that because it's not on your network. It's on the user's mobile network or on their Wi-Fi connected on their home connection, and they're becoming more and more successful. And it's worrisome. And I think that more organizations need to look into MDM. Of course, that's easy for me to say because I'm not fronting the bill. Like, they're not cheap solutions, if you will. But it just worries me that there's so many phones out there that are susceptible to being attacked. And these threat actors they're well aware of it at this point.
I actually just this morning, and I'm sure you guys are the same, and most of our audience, I got one this morning that was kind of funny in terms of it wasn't at the high end of the gene pool for an SMS attempt. It said, "Hello, dear. This is whoever from wherever." It's like no one calls me dear. It was a poor ESA attempt. But yeah, it's I get. Everyone asks me every week. I get a question from a friend or an acquaintance. I get this text. Should I respond? No. The answer is no. Don't finish your sentence. The answer is no.
Delete.
Yeah. In terms of pre-incident planning, are there some fundamentals that companies still get wrong? What do they not plan for?
The fundamentals themselves. My take on things is that if organizations around the world paid more attention to what I like to call security 101, a former manager of mine, Sean, if you're watching at this point, hi, Sean, used to say companies are terrible at security 101. And I mean basic things like you set up your Active Directory, you have, whether it's 10 or tens of thousands of users, you have permissions just over permissioned like crazy. You have, well, I wasn't getting into too many specifics, but overall, it's security 101. And what bothers me is that like ransomware is successful. My world is ransomware and I'm obsessed with it. And the top 3 infection vectors are RDP, that being open on critical servers, right, with poor passwords and no MFA, security 101. Those are all security 101 things. Phishing, which things like not blocking in your email security gateway certain attachment types. There's a website called filesec.io, I believe it is. And it lists all these different types of attachments, potential attachments that should be blocked, like a .cab file. .cab is a Microsoft cabinet file. It's what they use for a lot of their Windows software. They don't use zip files internally in Windows, right? They use cab files. Why would you want to attach that to an email? Why would that need to be able to get through your email security gateway? And so that's just one random example for phishing, is just not blocking malicious file attachment types. Another most common, top 3 for ransomware is software vulnerabilities. And where do most of those come from? Well, when I say when they come from, I mean, where does the problem really come from? It comes from poor patching cycles or inadequate patching cycles. Or, oh, we patch within 60 days. Oh, okay. That's kind of long. Now, I know we need to test and dev and then push it out to this group first. Like, okay, but you need to, cut that to 60 days is way too long. 30 days is too long, in my opinion. And then you've got groups who just outright fail, and there's so many. So if you're out there watching, hey, pay attention. Your network appliances, your firewalls, your VPN concentrators, the things that we purchase and implement and maintain to help secure us, we're not patching those. And many of them end up with vulnerabilities. And oftentimes, ransomware and other actors find that and they go, ooh, cool. And what are the things I just mentioned? Having RDP open to the internet on a critical server, right? Not blocking well-known attachment types that should be blocked and not allowed to ingress into your user email boxes, and patching, right? I mean, we could talk about asset management and all these things. They're all security 101. And I just see that it's such a problem. And I don't know if it's ever going to get fixed, because too many organizations have become complacent with the way that they're doing things. and they don't realize change is needed until something bad happens.
It's funny. Sorry, I'm just going to do one link here. I know that you interviewed, in part of your job with your webinars, you interviewed Cher DeGrippo in November, and we interviewed her as well in August of last year, 2023. But when you were talking to her, she mentioned an essay written by Bruce Schneier in April 2000. And the title of the essay was Security as a Process. And you read the essay today, which I did, and almost to the letter, it's all still applicable.
100% agree. But by the way, we love her, the Royal, we love her. We even had her as a keynote for a conference for Cactus Con in the Arizona in the United States area this past year. Absolutely love her. Hi, if you're watching, by the way. And that paper, you read it today, and it's like it didn't age at all. It's right. The same concept, still applies. I look back at talks from, security conferences from 10 years ago, and I go, yeah, that right there, like that's still a thing, and it just doesn't seem to be kind of catching on, and I'm not sure when it will, which is one of my big things is trying to help with that.
Governments are certainly taking cybersecurity more seriously, I think, than they've done in the past. But are they doing enough, and are they doing the right things?
I think that many government organizations around the world are doing things where they say, you need to, rather than saying, you need to, and here are resources to do it. You need to, and here's funding to do it. You get the idea. So I don't think that they're doing a very good job with enabling. I think it's more of a shaking of the finger. And while that's where you want to start, you have to do this, like, that's great. But then, how do we make that happen? So organizations in healthcare, right, who work with protected health information, PHI, right? They're told you have to comply to all these things. And then there's really not a lot of assistance with learning about them, just being told you should have endpoint detection on all your hosts, right? There's many organizations out there who are like, first off, Google or Bing, if you're, a Binger, endpoint protection software. And then 40 vendors come up and they're like, okay. And then they have to try to run a proof of concept, a POC with one of them. And they have no idea what to look for. They have no idea, oh, well, we caught these 7 alerts on our test. Well, how many commands did you run? 117? Like, is that good? Like, they don't know what they're looking for, basically, is what I'm saying. And I think that we need a lot more resources that are government driven, especially training. We provide training through SANS, and we have government discounts at SANS, but that's not the government coming in and saying, hey, you in these critical sectors, here's some courses. And I don't mean just SANS courses. I mean just any types of courses, or for that matter, here's a bunch of free resources. There's one person out there that just came to mind randomly here, and she goes by Diva, DFIR, and then Diva, DIVA. And her mission is to amass as much free training resources as she possibly can. And I've thought many times in the past, I've just sat there and thought, what if she worked for the US government? And what if she pushed really, really, really hard to get that, more formalized and driven out? If she ever watches this, she's going to be like, like, whoa, Ryan. But I think of these, we have people in our community who work their tails off trying to provide a ton of free resources. I do a lot of it myself, and I just don't see the governments doing a lot of that. And I think that there could be a better job done there. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that in the United States, we have this group that run through the United States Secret Service, which I'm not sure if many folks in the United States know about this. Many ransomware cases, when they get reported to law enforcement, it'll typically go to the FBI. When they're worked, like hands-on worked, however, the actual responses are typically handled by the Secret Service. Most people don't know that. And most people see the Secret Service and they think presidential protection, right? Bodyguards. There's a lot more to the Secret Service. They run a group called the National Computer Forensic Institute, NCFI, and it is phenomenal. They have amazing training, but they are so, under-resourced compared to what I would love to see, right? And getting a lot of law enforcement agencies and things of that nature trained up. But I had to make a shout out to them because I've worked with them before. And if any of them are watching, I didn't want them to be like, hey, we're working out here. Like, yes, they are.
So some researchers and reporters actually engage with cyber criminals for the purpose of producing reports and stories, and that's been the subject of some criticism. On the one side, there's the argument that researchers learn valuable information that ultimately may be helpful in countering threats, but on the other hand, interacting with cyber criminals glorifies their actions, and by doing so helps with their messaging sometimes and encourages them to continue. So what's your take on this? Should we be engaging with them and platforming them?
My response might be a bit polarizing for anyone who watches or listens, but I'm of the mind that we should be interviewing threat actors who want to do an interview. And my whole thing is I want to humanize them. When I say the media, I mean whatever your media intake methodology might be, right? The media portrays, for example, ransomware as this massive, crazy, ridiculous threat. There's no stopping it. And it's just this mythical creature, essentially, this living entity. No, it's humans with their hands on the keyboard doing dumb stuff and being criminals, right? So I look at it like, a good example would be a particular fellow who goes by the name Wazawaka, along with a number of other names. Ransom Boris is one of his names. He is prone to doing interviews. And I absolutely love those interviews because the more you get people like him to just talk, the more you understand their mentality, the way that they think, and they do give tips and tricks on, how to approach the overall situation. And sometimes they even will do, like when you ask me, what are some trends you're seeing? Like ask them, like, hey, what are some trends you're seeing? And then just whatever trends they're talking about, like go focus on those. Like that could be a problem. But I like the overall humanization factor of it. They're people. Yes, they're criminals, but they're people. And the more we understand that it's not this imminent threat that is mythical, right, but rather is a human being or a group of human beings operating a business as they see it, right, the better. And I think a good example of that is I was working a case with they're no longer around. Well, the team name is no longer a brand, but the actors have moved around. But it was a team called the Maze Team, like you're traversing a maze. And they were in 2019 the ones who basically made popular data exfiltration, stealing data from organizations and using that as typically a second form of extortion. They're the ones who made it really, really, I don't want to say popular, but basically popular with the other ransomware actors who were like, oh, yeah, that's useful. We should do that. They put a press release out in July of 2020. And many of our countries were in the midst of lockdowns, and we had, COVID-19, and it was this crazy world environment. And their little press release was like, hey, we know that we are in a worldwide economic crisis. ... TLDR for listeners, we don't care. It doesn't matter to us. Like, we're also hurting for money, so sucks for you, basically. And then they laid out these additional parameters to working with their clients. They call them clients, by the way, not victims, but their client, or their partner. And just reading through the press releases really gives you a better feeling for how they think and how they operate. And those types of things can help with things like negotiations and understanding truly the intent and let's just leave it with intent for right now, of these actors and how far they're willing to go. I think that's important. And I don't mean to give them a platform where we're going to have, on a national news channel, like, hey, this is so-and-so, and he's ransomed 30 hospitals the past year. Like, let's talk to it. Like, no, about all that. but just having a group with a spokesperson and seeing that person and realizing you start to like I think it instills, or I should say not instills, I think it removes a bit of the fear of this unknown entity, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. We actually asked Ransom Boris to contribute to our annual predictions blog post,
That's right.
and, which you did too. And he
Yes.
actually came up with quite a thoughtful response.
I totally forgot about it. That was just a couple months ago too. Yeah, no, I loved seeing his name in there. I was like, "Ooh, check it out." I think that's important. I think I don't think that it's trying to make them famous, or in some cases, maybe you do want to make them famous. Like, hey, this is the person, and by the way, that's the person right there. Um, and yeah, I loved seeing that in that article. And I think another thing that it kind of helps squash is that these are not just what did I call it? A mythical creature or a mythical entity that doesn't exist, right? Not only are these humans, but for many of these actors, the royal we, like I don't, but not the world per se, but many people in the research community, they know who they are. Like they know who the actual human being is, what they post on their social media profiles, what they're up to, how they launder their money. A lot of these things are could be a little more public knowledge, and a lot of folks don't realize that they typically reside in, I'll just call it non-friendly countries, right? Countries where they're going to attack their victims. They don't have extradition policies, for example, right? So Ransom Boris is a very well-known entity, but they're not going to send him. They're like, all right, yeah, get on over to the United States. That's not going to happen, right? So I think that giving them the ability to let us see them as a human being, I think it's important.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people probably don't realize too is that there are quite a few occasions where relationships with the threat actors have enabled people to walk them back, to talk them back from doing some quite bad things.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually. There's many of the ransomware actors, for the folks watching that may not be aware, they communicate via these darknet forums. Darknet simply just meaning that you have to usually connect via a Tor circuit. In other words, just using Tor, right? And you connect to these whether it be a marketplace or a forum, a lot of their discussions are public, at least in that forum. And being able to review those and see how they operate and see how they interact and see how they communicate, I think that's really important. And I think being able to have any type of influence on some of them, just like you mentioned, sounds like it could have a lot of positives.
An interesting anecdote that I heard just recently or late last year is that on a lot of these sites, and I'm sure you guys know this, but on a lot of these sites, there are SOCs or people acting in disguise, whether they are researchers or law enforcement personnel. So sometimes you have people talking to each other and you're not sure, am I talking to law enforcement? Am I talking to a cyber criminal, or am I talking to a researcher who is maintaining an identity on this site?
Right, Brett, wouldn't it be funny if you and I have talked to each other before? That would be hilarious.
Not
Exactly.
unlikely. Finally, a question that we ask to everybody. None of our counter ransomware efforts are working. The problem isn't getting any better. Should we just ban ransom payments?
Oh, that's a rough one for me to answer. So, because of my course and because of how many presentations I do on ransomware, I have to be very careful for my answer in terms of not saying what I really want to say, which I'll say right now. No one should ever pay ransoms, because then it would just go away. Done, right? Yeah, in a perfect world scenario, if everyone stopped paying ransoms, then what would be the utility in performing the attacks, right? But when it comes down to, like, I'll just say legislation, no, it's not, that's a little too US centric, I guess. When it comes to laws and putting them in place and banning ransomware payments, I sit and I think about, like, what happens in many countries when a human is kidnapped, which, but by the way, we're fairly lucky here in the United States that it's not anywhere near as common as it is in many other countries around the world. But, if a human being is kidnapped, is it illegal to pay a ransom to get them back? Right? Is that illegal? In many countries, it's not illegal. In many countries, it's actually suggested, yeah, just go ahead and pay the ransom. What do I think about ransomware payment bans? And I just repeated the question so I could buy myself more time. See how I did that? I think that banning could be problematic because when it comes down to it, it's a utilitarian decision. It should be a utilitarian decision. What's going to do the most good for the most number of people? Unfortunately, there's a lot of unknowns in that. A lot of people don't realize that some of these cyber criminals, the funding that does go to them is used for some devious stuff. Like business email compromise, which is simply when a business email system is compromised, hence, I guess, the name, right? There's a couple of groups, including one very, very large one who I don't want to mention right now out by their name, but they are notorious for basically slaughtering entire villages of people, of human beings, and just snuffing out life. And they use BEC to fund a lot of their, basically, I've just considered like a pirate kind of lifestyles. And we haven't necessarily seen, at least I haven't yet, seen that directly attributed to ransomware, but you never really know where that money is going. Is it going to a number of fancy cars in a large garage? Okay, or is it going to something a lot worse? But I always take the easy way out and say that some organizations, if they were not to pay, then they would have thousands of people lose their jobs, and there's no way around it. At the same time, when you pay a ransom, you have to remember you're working with criminals. That's who you're trusting. You're giving implicit trust to a criminal, and that's never really a good idea, right? So I don't think that most ransoms should be paid. I think that 99.9% of ransoms should not be paid. But I think that if governments go around and make it such that there's additional fines on top of or jail time or whatever it might be, it's going to complicate things for organizations who have no other choice but to take that risk. And it is a risk, paying a ransom. So I think that as opposed to banning the payments, that we just need more government funded, I mean, around the world, not just US centric, that we need a lot more training and a lot more security 101 reviews and oversight, and at the same time, fewer checkboxes, because we have so many programs that end up just being, oh, I checked a box. I checked these boxes, so I'm secure. And then meanwhile, not really at all. So that's my sneaky answer to that question.
And with that, I'd like to thank you, Ryan, for joining us today. It's been really interesting to learn from your experience as an educator and with incident responses. So as always, thank you very much. And we'd like to thank our listeners as well for tuning in. To stay up to date on the latest in cybersecurity, be sure to subscribe to our podcast.